Clark is disgusted. I can't even blame Caitlin for being disgusted with the Fever. Take a look at her face. This is probably after she got the news that, hey, we're gonna be promoting the MVP2, the both of you guys for MVP thing. This is how it made her attitude. She wanted nothing to do with that MVP2 campaign.
That reaction is getting interpreted one very specific way. But the bigger question is not what Caitlin Clark's face supposedly means. It is why the Indiana Fever chose this exact moment to turn an individual MVP race into something they are branding around two players.
Take a look at her face, like, MVP2. MVP2, what the hell? This is supposed to be my campaign. Look at her face. She don't want nothing to do with this. She don't want nothing to do with this MVP2 campaign and this nonsense y'all trying to do. Look at her. She's over it. She's over it. Oh, MVP2? Okay. Yeah, I'm an MVP.
Now, nobody can seriously prove from a facial expression that Caitlin was angry about an MVP campaign. That part is interpretation, not fact. But the campaign itself is real, and once Indiana started pushing this MVP2 idea, it created a problem the organization probably should have seen coming. Because MVP voting is not a participation trophy. It is not an award for having two really good teammates. It is a ranking exercise. Voters eventually have to separate players, compare value, compare production, compare impact, and put names in an order. So when your own team appears unwilling to make that distinction, fans are naturally going to ask why. And there is another part of this that gets much more interesting later, because once you compare what Indiana is doing with how another MVP contenders team is positioned, the whole strategy starts looking even stranger.
This is a way. Talk about throwing Caitlin Clark MVP opportunity away. I mean, you already did that with the sabotage led by Stephanie White when you dropped back-to-back games and you wanted Aaliyah Boston playing point guard after you were on a 5-game win streak with Caitlin Clark being the most dominant player in the league with the ball in her hands. You decided that for 2 straight games, you wanted to take the ball out of her hands and make the center Aaliyah Boston, Mrs. Hub, the point guard.
That is where the frustration really comes from. The complaint is bigger than a social media graphic. There has already been an ongoing debate around how Indiana uses Caitlin Clark, how much the offense should run through her, and whether the Fever consistently understand what separates her impact from a conventional scoring guard. The criticism in that clip goes back to games where the offense changed shape and Clark spent stretches without the ball controlling every possession. You can disagree with calling that sabotage, because that is an extremely strong accusation, and there is no evidence presented here that the coaching staff deliberately tried to hurt her. But the basketball argument underneath the emotion is legitimate. Clark's value is not simply measured by how many shots she makes. She manipulates the entire floor. She creates passing windows. She forces defenders to pick her up farther from the basket. She increases pace. She manufactures points that never appear beside her name in the scoring column. So when Indiana markets two players as one shared MVP concept, the criticism becomes, are you flattening two completely different types of value into the same category just because they wear the same jersey?
I am disgusted by the Indiana Fever, but I am far from surprised. To say I'm not shocked in the least bit that this idiotic franchise chose to go about the MVP situation this way. Indiana Fever promote MVP2. Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell, that's our MVP2. What the hell are y'all talking about, man?
And this is where the campaign becomes difficult to defend from a messaging perspective. There is nothing wrong with celebrating Kelsey Mitchell. She is an elite scorer and one of the most dangerous offensive guards in the league. Supporting Mitchell does not require diminishing Clark, and supporting Clark does not require pretending Mitchell has not been outstanding. But an MVP campaign is supposed to make a case. It is persuasion. You tell voters why your player has been more valuable than the other candidates. You present the strongest statistical argument. You show the team's performance with that player driving the offense. You frame signature games. You remind people how much responsibility that player carries. MVP2 does almost the opposite. It asks voters to admire the partnership. That might be excellent branding for a backcourt. It might be great for team chemistry. It might even sell merchandise. But if the actual goal is to win an individual award, it muddies the argument before another team even has to attack it.
Kelsey don't do nothing but score. Kelsey Mitchell averages 2 more points per game than Caitlin Clark. What are we really talking about here? We're talking about somebody that averages 2 more points, but averages 7, 8 less assists, 3, 4 less rebounds, 2 less steals. Like, what are we talking about, man? What are we really talking about? Y'all are forcing this Kelsey thing. Y'all have been doing it for long enough. I am sick of it.
This is also the point where fans have to separate emotion from the actual comparison. The presenter's argument is that Mitchell's scoring advantage is relatively small compared with Clark's broader production as a passer and rebounder. That is the heart of it. MVP conversations are not scoring title conversations. If player A scores a couple more points, but player B creates significantly more points through assists, rebounds more, initiates the offense, attracts more defensive attention, and carries more playmaking responsibility, voters are allowed to conclude that player B produces more total value even while scoring slightly less. That does not mean the comparison is automatically over. Efficiency matters, turnovers matter, defense matters, team record matters, availability matters, late game performance matters. There are many legitimate variables, but Indiana's campaign does not explain those variables. It avoids choosing between them, and that is exactly why some Caitlin Clark fans are irritated. They feel like the franchise wants the benefits of her superstar profile without publicly saying the obvious thing an MVP campaign normally says. This is our best player, and here is why she should win.
Take a look at this, the MVP2. Y'all got Lexi Hull promoting this. Y'all, man, like, come on. I can't believe it. It's the Indiana Fever. They got Ty Harris pushing this MVP2 campaign. Ridiculous. They're like, y'all really running with this.
Look at the language around the rollout. Teammates are being brought into the message. Players are being asked about both candidates. The organization is clearly leaning into togetherness. That makes complete sense if the goal is maintaining harmony inside a locker room. It makes much less sense if the goal is maximizing votes. Because think about what a voter hears. Indiana is essentially saying, we have two MVP-level players. Okay, which one is more valuable? The campaign does not answer. Which player most fundamentally changes the geometry of a defense? It does not answer. Which one has the stronger all-around statistical profile? It does not answer. Which one would Indiana struggle more to replace possession by possession? Again, the campaign does not answer. So now the voter has to make Indiana's argument for them, while another candidate's case can remain clean, simple, and singular. That matters more than fans sometimes realize. Awards are not only decided by raw statistics, narrative clarity matters too. When two candidates are close, the cleaner story is easier to remember.
Caitlin Clark can't even get a proper MVP rollout. Y'all basically telling the voters to vote for A'ja Wilson, by the way. You guys are just telling the voters, hey, we don't want you guys to have to pick between our players. We don't want any drama. Just go pick A'ja Wilson. That's what this is doing. That's all this is doing, is telling the voters to go and pick A'ja Wilson. MVP2 campaign. This is dumb as hell. This is stupid.
And there is the strategic consequence. The presenter argues this effectively tells voters to choose A'ja Wilson. That might sound dramatic, but from a campaign design perspective, you can see the logic. If Indiana divides its own messaging between Clark and Mitchell while Las Vegas presents Wilson as the unquestioned centerpiece of its case, which argument is easier to understand? One franchise is saying, here is our MVP. The other is effectively saying, here are our two. Those are not equally sharp messages. And the reason this became such a hot-button issue is that Clark is not just another good player who happened to enter the race. She arrived with enormous expectations, immediately became one of the league's central figures, and has been discussed in MVP terms since early in her career. That means every decision around her is magnified. If Indiana promotes her aggressively, people will accuse them of favoring the superstar. If they do not promote her aggressively enough, her supporters will accuse them of failing to recognize what they have. That is the uncomfortable position the Fever created for themselves. But nobody forced them to solve it with MVP2.
Kelsey Mitchell's not an MVP, respectfully. She don't do nothing but score. Caitlin Clark brings in 40 points per game through scoring and assists. Like, come on, man. What are we even talking about? And y'all make us have to talk like this to where, to us, it's like, it comes off as like we hate Kelsey. That's not the case. It's just like y'all don't get it, bro. Like, y'all was supposed to establish a pecking order, and y'all failed to do so.
This part of the criticism is harsh toward Mitchell, and I think it needs a little more balance. Saying she does nothing but score undersells how difficult elite scoring actually is, especially when defenses know exactly what is coming. Mitchell's ability to create points matters enormously to Indiana, and teams do not accidentally produce MVP-caliber records with scorers who provide no value. But the frustration underneath that statement is really about categories. Mitchell can be an incredible scorer without having the exact same MVP case as Clark. Those two ideas can coexist. There is a tendency in sports conversations to act like every comparison must be disrespectful. If somebody says one player is more valuable, people hear that as an insult to the other player. That is not how ranking works. An MVP ballot itself is a comparison. Somebody finishes first, somebody finishes second, somebody finishes fifth. So Indiana's fear of publicly differentiating its stars, if that is what motivated this strategy, does not actually remove the comparison. It just outsources the uncomfortable part to everybody else. And that is why the pecking order argument keeps resurfacing. Not because teammates need to walk around announcing who is better, but because organizations usually know which player their identity is built around.
I mean, I think any of them deserve it, for sure. And I think for us, like, it just shows the success of our team. I think all of them can tell you, like, they're just such big team players. They'll do whatever that we need for our team to win, and it's showing up on the stat sheet for sure. So just I'm excited for those end of season awards and just to see what they can achieve. And I think that just we'll be so happy. The city will be so happy. Our fans will be so proud. So regardless, we're proud of them.
Listen carefully to Lexi Hull there, because her answer is actually very reasonable from a teammate's perspective. She says both players deserve recognition. She talks about team success. She talks about both of them being team first. That is exactly what you would expect a teammate to say. You would almost never expect Hull to stand at a microphone and say, actually Caitlin should win and Kelsey should not. That would be ridiculous. So the problem is not Lexi Hull. The problem is asking teammates to provide the sharp distinction that a front office's marketing strategy should provide. Players protect the locker room. That is part of being a good teammate. They are supposed to support each other. The business side of the franchise has a different job. That side can celebrate Mitchell's season while also building a specific Clark MVP case around playmaking, offensive creation, team performance, and historical context. Those messages are not mutually exclusive. Indiana chose to merge them anyway. And this is where we reach the part that should bother people more than any facial expression or fan theory. The controversy is not really about whether Caitlin personally hates the slogan. We do not know that. The real issue is whether the slogan makes sense on its own terms.
We're going to get to my guy Venom Reacts as well. They got Ty Harris in on it.
Deserve it, both of them. I mean, nobody wants to be cold, but hey, I'm going to throw it out there. It's hard for them, so it'll be amazing just to have them because they definitely deserve it.
All right, so they got all the players in on it. They got the players in on the co-MVP.
That second teammate reaction makes the same point in a different way. Everybody is staying diplomatic, because of course they are. But diplomacy is not persuasion. Imagine an NBA team entering award season with two candidates and refusing to establish the difference between "we are proud of both" and "this is the player we believe should actually be voted MVP." The first statement is about culture. The second is about an award campaign. Indiana appears to be trying to do both at once. And when you mix those objectives, neither message becomes as strong as it could be. That is especially important because the MVP race exists outside the Fever ecosystem. Voters are comparing Clark and Mitchell not only with each other, but with A'ja Wilson and every other serious candidate. So Indiana does not get to define the question as which Fever player deserves love. The question is, who has been the most valuable player in the entire league? That requires a much higher standard. It requires Indiana to explain why one of its candidates should be ranked ahead of the rest. MVP2 never really gets there.
Look at what Venom said. Kelsey Mitchell has never been recognized as a top 3 MVP ever in her career, even at the point in time of me typing this. Caitlin was top 4 MVP in her rookie season, the number 1 favorite last year and top 3 favorite this year, yet not a peep from her own team endorsing her. It's this team that makes it hard to support others when there's clear malpractice going on. CC fans are tired of being used for the benefit of others at the cost of CC's legacy.
Now we get to the fan argument that gives this controversy its real emotional charge. The post shown there argues that Clark has been a major MVP candidate early in her career and claims the Fever have never pushed her individually with the same enthusiasm fans expected. The statement also says Clark supporters are tired of seeing her popularity benefit other people while they believe her own legacy is not being protected. That is a fan's interpretation, not an objective fact, but it explains the anger. Caitlin Clark changes the economics of attention around everybody near her. More national conversation follows the Fever. More opposing arenas gain attention when Indiana arrives. Teammates receive more exposure. Coaches receive more scrutiny. Executives receive more scrutiny. Every basketball decision becomes a national debate. That visibility is both a gift and a burden. And because the spotlight is so intense, Clark fans watch the organization for signs that it understands what she represents. A slogan might seem trivial to somebody outside that fan base. To those supporters, it becomes symbolic. They are not literally arguing over 2 letters and a number. They are asking whether Indiana recognizes the difference between having a superstar and merely having a collection of good players. That is why the reaction is so disproportionate to what, on the surface, looks like a harmless social campaign.
It's always been Caitlin versus Asia. The Fever have their own agenda and has still never pushed Caitlin Clark for MVP yet. Is that not suspicious? I agree with everything Venom said right here. I agree with everything he said right here. Asia got 4 Olympians on her team. They ain't out there pushing nobody else and all this. No, they let it be known it's the Asia's world. The Indiana Fever is the only organization that refuses to support their biggest star, the biggest star in the league.
And here is the contrast I teased earlier. The presenter points to Las Vegas and says the Aces do not appear confused about who their MVP case is built around. That comparison is important, even if some of the rhetoric around it is exaggerated. Arsha Wilson's team can have other accomplished players, stars, champions, and major contributors without creating uncertainty about whose MVP resume they are promoting. That is normal. Teams routinely have multiple all-star level players while still presenting one individual as the primary award candidate. Why? Because valuable is not synonymous with only good player on the roster. You can acknowledge everybody else and still make a hierarchy-based argument. That is the strategic mistake Indiana appears to be making. The Fever seem determined to prove that recognizing Clark does not require overlooking Mitchell. They are correct about that. But instead of running 2 distinct messages, they combine the players into one concept that weakens the individual nature of the award. That is the real answer to why this campaign is creating so much backlash. It is not because supporting Kelsey Mitchell is wrong. It is because the chosen format asks fans and voters to treat an individual race like a shared honor before the voting has even happened. And once you understand that, the slogan stops looking clever and starts looking confused.
What are y'all doing? Everybody in this franchise has benefited from Caitlin Clark. I would say Caitlin Clark has benefited the least out of everybody around her at this point. This is nasty work, man. The Indiana Fever refused to promote Caitlin Clark as the MVP, even though I already know the award is going to Asia Wilson. Once the Indiana Fever lost the top 3 seed and the Aces passed them back up, that was done.
There is also one final layer that cannot be ignored: timing. The presenter himself concedes that he expects Wilson to win once the standings and race shifted the way he believes they did. That makes Indiana's decision even more puzzling. If Clark is facing an uphill battle anyway, what exactly is lost by giving her a full individual campaign? You are not disrespecting Mitchell by saying Kelsey has had an outstanding season and we also believe Caitlin has an MVP case. Professional sports teams do this constantly. Awards campaigns are inherently selective. A franchise nominates one player for one thing, another player for something else, and sometimes multiple people for the same award with separate cases. What makes this different is that Indiana tried to turn the coexistence itself into the campaign. Maybe they believed it was creative, maybe they wanted to avoid friction, maybe they thought celebrating both would feel more authentic to the team. Those are plausible explanations, but none changes the basic competitive problem. Every bit of ambiguity inside Indiana's message makes a singular outside candidate easier to understand. And if the goal is actually winning votes, clarity matters.
So it's going to Asia Wilson, but at the end of the day, you drop the ball when it comes to promoting your biggest star, and the fans have every right to speak up about this complete malpractice and this complete, utter nonsense that continues to come from the organization. What says you? Get down in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. This keep the video.
So strip away the speculation about Caitlin Clark's facial expressions. Strip away the claims of intentional sabotage, because there is no evidence here proving anything that serious. Strip away the unnecessary shots at Kelsey Mitchell, who is having a season worthy of recognition in her own right. What remains is still a legitimate criticism. The Indiana Fever had an opportunity to explain Caitlin Clark's MVP case in the clearest possible terms, and instead they introduced a shared MVP2 identity that makes the case harder to understand. If they believe Clark is the stronger candidate, say why. Talk about the assists. Talk about total offensive creation. Talk about how defenses respond to her. Talk about the responsibilities she carries. Talk about winning. Talk about the statistical gap between what she creates and what other players create. If they believe Mitchell has the stronger case, then make that argument too. Explain the scoring. Explain the efficiency. Explain her consistency. Explain the moments where her production has carried Indiana. But do not pretend an MVP ballot is going to give 2 Fever players first place because the marketing department found a way to put both names on the same graphic. That is not how the award works, and there is a broader lesson here for Indiana. When you have a player who brings unprecedented attention, every organizational decision around that player gets interpreted as a statement of value. That can be unfair, it can be exhausting, it can put teammates in uncomfortable positions. But that is the reality of having one of the biggest stars in the sport. The answer is not to pretend the hierarchy does not exist. The answer is to communicate it intelligently without disrespecting anybody else. Kelsey Mitchell does not need Caitlin Clark diminished to receive praise. Caitlin Clark does not need Kelsey Mitchell diminished to have an MVP campaign. Those are false choices. The Fever could have celebrated both while still being specific about what makes Clark's candidacy different. Instead, they chose a slogan that practically guarantees the conversation becomes Clark versus Mitchell, which is probably the exact fight they were trying to avoid. And that might be the greatest irony of the entire rollout. The attempt to emphasize unity created another division. The attempt to celebrate 2 stars made fans argue over which one matters more. The attempt to avoid choosing forced everybody else to choose for them. Now Indiana has to live with that conversation while Wilson's case remains much simpler from the outside. So I want you to pick a side. Is MVP2 actually a smart way for Indiana to celebrate 2 great seasons without tearing teammates apart? Or did the Fever completely mishandle Caitlin Clark's MVP campaign by refusing to make a clear individual case? Drop your answer in the comments, and if you want more WNBA breakdowns without pretending every rumor is a fact, like the video, subscribe, and keep the conversation going.